Big news here in Seattle. It is the end of an era for Starbucks. As you just said, Howard Schultz announcing his plan to step down, not just from his role at the company as the executive chairman, but also from the board. And that decision fueling some speculation that he could pursue public service, that this might be one step before that. I should tell you that Myron Ullman, the former chairman and CEO of JCPenney, is going to be appointed the chair of Starbucks. Melody Hobson, many CNBC viewers know very well from Ariel Investments, also another board member, appointed vice chair as part of this transition. Kevin Johnson, the CEO of Starbucks, will remain in place. And in large part, you talked about the stock falling about 1%, but this transition has been in place for quite some time. I remember being here in Seattle when Howard Schultz stepped down as CEO, and perhaps that was the more momentous decision in terms of the company's future. Questions about the company's future, of course, continue. There has been huge growth in places like China. They just announced plans to expand, in fact, to build up to 2 new stores a day in China, up from 1 store a day, which they had been averaging before, and a partnership, $7 billion deal with Nestle on its packaged goods. But as we've talked about so much before about Starbucks, same-store sales in the United States have continued to struggle. Big questions about whether they can overcome some challenges around technology, around getting in the store and out of the store quickly and what that means. And then, of course, the public relations hit that the company took just this past month and a half over Rachel Bai's training and the training that they did last week. I should tell you, the plan was actually set in place for Howard Schultz to step down on May 15th. They had talked about that for several months, I'm told, starting in January. Once the incident in Philadelphia happened in April, that plan was put on hold and upended. And of course, we're now hearing about it now. I want to read you real quick a note from Howard Schultz to the company's employees. He writes the following: I set out to build a company that my father, a blue-collar worker and World War II veteran, never had a chance to work for. Together, we've done that and so much more by balancing profitability and social conscience, compassion, rigor, love, and responsibility. Of course, I mentioned earlier, guys, that there is speculation that he will run or could run for public office. This is what he said in his note to employees. He says, I'm going to be thinking about a range of options for myself, from philanthropy to public service. The public service note is the key here, but I'm a long way from knowing what the future holds. I spoke with Howard earlier this morning for a New York Times column, and he expanded on that. He said, I want to be truthful with you without creating more speculative headlines. For some time now, I've been deeply concerned about the country, the growing division at home, and our standing in the world. One of the things I want to do in my next chapter is figure out if there is a role I can play in giving back. I'm not exactly sure what that means yet. Of course, that will not stop the speculation and the questions. We will have those questions, and we will have Mr. Schultz with the answers tomorrow morning on Squawk Box, live at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. So you can tune in, and hopefully we can hear all of this directly from Mr. Schultz himself.
We look forward to that, Andrew. But in the meantime, it was interesting when Schultz really kind of took on the role of Starbucks defender when the whole Philadelphia store issue came about. He was the one who was front and center. He was the one explaining the company, apologizing for the company. It wasn't the CEO, and that sort of made you wonder what kind of potential future he might have more in the public spotlight.
You know, I would take the opposite side of that in two respects. One is actually in the immediate aftermath of the incident. Kevin Johnson was the one who went out and was the one you saw on television. He was the one on Good Morning America literally the day after. The training program, no doubt, was spearheaded by Howard Schultz. But I would suggest that Howard Schultz, in terms of the public positions and social issues that the company has taken on over the years, was, what took place in the last month, I think, is just indicative of how the company has approached so many of these issues, whether it be gun rights, whether it be LGBT issues. They've approached they've been involved in this conversation in a way long before it was fashionable for most CEOs to talk about social issues. And of course, there's a big controversy, by the way, about whether CEOs should be even entering some of these debates themselves. But if there is a CEO that will get credit or blame for what has turned over the past 2 years into a roar from the CEO community on so many issues, it is, in fact, Howard Schultz.
Andrew, it's Karen. All kinds of questions, but one related to Starbucks stock, specifically Howard Schultz stock, which I think he owns, it looks like 36 million shares.
Yep.
Any thought about what he would do with that? Is he going to put it in a foundation? What's
so
the
my
plan?
understanding is what he told me, and now reading this note that he sent out to employees, he plans to work on it. He has a family foundation, which has been in place for quite some time. He's also planning to write a book about corporate social responsibility. I asked him directly and asked the company about whether he plans to sell his stock. He does not plan to sell his stock. So I do not think that that is something that will be an overhang on the stock, at least for now. He has, I believe, joined the Giving Pledge. I believe he did that many years ago. So I imagine at some point he will be gifting or giving away that stock, and I imagine some of that might flow through the foundation. Of course, if he were to run for president in the future, you know, a year or two ago, I would have told you he would have to sell all of that stock. I think perhaps the rules may have changed. So that's actually a very interesting question. But where the answer was quite clear a year or two ago,
Or
I'm
he
not
could get
sure
a
it's
big
as
tax
clear today.
deduction.
Or he could get a big tax deduction.
Or roll
but, you know,
it. Anyway.
my opinion in this is not important. The only one we really care about is Kanye's. So, you know.
Andrew, thanks so much. Andrew Ross
Thank you.
Sorkin, who broke this story earlier. You see the reaction in Starbucks after hours down about 1.4% or so. So what do you think, Guy? What's the impact here, if any?
I think the 1% sell-off to me it's just a reaction to, you know, algorithms reading this headline and selling the stock off. I think in my opinion, I think if the problems with Starbucks are far greater than Mr. Schultz leaving this. We had this conversation at the beginning, I think, of 2017 or so that he had announced it. We talked about the stock probably making an all-time high into the spring when he was going to step down, which is effectively what happened. So this should come as no surprise. My biggest hang-up with the company continues to be valuation, and does a 21 multiple, is it justified with the growth they're seeing? Margins in the U.S. continue to decline. If you believe they're going to have double the amount of stores in China in the next 5 years, then maybe you buy the stock. I'm frightened by valuation.
I get that. But put on top of it the loss of the visionary who guided the company in the past through rough times to its heights, probably, in terms of growth in North America. When you put that on top of already the slowing growth that Guy said in North America, do you get more concerned?
No. I mean, first, Kevin Johnson is a global consumer products company veteran, and I think that's why he was brought in here. I'm not worried about the valuation at all. In fact, I think at 23 times 2019, or actually 18, you're at a $65 stock. This is the middle of the historical range on the company. I agree with what Andrew said over and over again. Howard Schultz didn't do this to grandstand for a run at president or anything else. This company has had a focus on there was no racial bias issue at Starbucks, as far as I'm concerned. And I think that this is a company that's been out there for a long time. It's taken a very significant leadership role. Because of that, I think it's a global company that stands on its own without Howard Schultz. I also think that China is very important. I think they're going to double their store count. They're going to have roughly 600 stores a year through 2022. I think Guy's very right to bring up U.S. margins have gone from 25 down to 22%. That's a concern. This Nestle deal, though, I think is accretive. I'm in the name for a long time. This news doesn't bother me at all. This is just about when were they going to do this? They were prepared for this for a long time.
Let's listen to what CEO Kevin Johnson said back in December 2016. This is shortly after taking the reins from Howard Schultz.
We talk to each other multiple times throughout the day on a wide range of topics. I know one thing. Every time that door to my office opens and Howard pops his head in, there's going to be some new exciting adventure ahead.
No more popping his head into that door, though.
Well, it's interesting talking about North American margins. We know what the draw has been is obviously this push towards online ordering, and a lot of this stuff, it was costly, right? And they actually had some bottlenecks over the last year and a half. It seems like they cleared that up. But I also think that here's a company that is growing sales and earnings at double digits, trading, on a forward basis at like 20 times. It's not particularly expensive in this market. And then when you take that number, they have like 27,500 stores. 10% of them are in China, and you guys say they're going to do 2 a day, so they're adding 600 a year. This is really a story about China over the next decade. They obviously bought Tivana. That was a big thing to play in China. So to me, I think the North American stuff right now is noise, and I think this announcement is noise.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it seems like they've been planning for this in slow motion for a while. The step back this time, as opposed to the time 18 years, 17 years ago, I think it felt very, very different. Right there, he couldn't just sit on the sidelines.
Right.
Right. He had to jump back
when he left the first.
Yes.
So
the
just to
first
remind
time.
people, he left the first time as CEO.
Right.
In 2000.
Yes.
In fact, take a look. We've calculated how the stock did in the 5 years after some high-profile CEOs stepped down, including Howard Schultz. Not bad. Not bad.
Yeah.
And this time it's different. We actually have a CEO who has been in place for a while. He's stepping down as executive chairman.
As Bill Gates, they had a very smooth transition as well. He talked about it well before, and Ballmer was in place. So I don't think that's not what's weighing on the stock. Other than 1%, 2%, that's not a big deal.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.